Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee.
Hi, this is Maria from DressPatternMaking.com. This video is part of my updated bodice block instructions. I've redone these instructions because I have refined my system. If you are interested in understanding the bodice block, that is, pattern making bust cups and how they differ to bra bust cups, the amount of ease that is standard in the bodice block, and details on the measurements, I recommend you watch my bodice block essential videos before drafting your bodice block. This is the metric version of the new bodice front instructions. Now the bodice back instructions are already on YouTube. Following that, I will be working on the pants EPUB booklet and the bodice EPUB booklet. These booklets will have the same content as the video, but in a format where you can progress at your own pace rather than having to pause the video, etc. If you find my content useful, please consider buying me a cup of coffee on Ko-fi. The link is in my YouTube channel header. Now, some of the information at the beginning and at the end of this video is in both the back video and the front video. So if you have already drafted the back block, you will already have heard some of this introductory information. I'll be using Dee Dee, my dressmaker's dummy, for the example measurements. I have created a separate video giving the details of the measurements needed to draft the block, but I will also be showing them on Dee Dee to the left side while drafting to the right. Now, if you haven't already watched my bodice block essential videos, starting with pattern making bust cups versus bra bust cups, and finishing with measuring for the bodice block, I suggest you watch them before starting to draft your bodice block. Before we start though, I want to make sure you understand some terminology. There are a few key measurements I'll be referring to throughout the video, and I want to make sure you are clear what they mean. Now, the high neck point is at the neck side of the shoulder line, and the shoulder point is at the other end of the shoulder line. Those points must remain constant because they are used for a few different measurements. The side seam also needs to be firmly established, and the same reference point used for the front arcs and the back arcs, that is the upper bust arc and the bust arc. To the left is the front block I'll be drafting for Dee Dee. It is a sleeveless block. I will start by drafting the one dart block, first the moulage, then I'll add the ease for the sleeveless block, then add ease for the block to be used with sleeves. After most of the block is drafted, I'll be manipulating some of the waist dart into the side seam so that we end up with a 2-dart block as shown in the middle. So I will, and you will if you're drafting your block, end up with the option of using the moulage, the sleeveless block, or the standard block, which is the one you use when you add sleeves. Together with the bodice back, it will make a bodice set. But of course, if you do want to use the standard block, the one that is drafted specifically to use with sleeves, you will also need to draft the sleeve block. Now, I just want to be very clear about this. Most block making instruction draft a bodice block that is to be used with sleeves. Now, the difficulty with that is that people try it on before putting the sleeves on, and that's a good idea because you actually do want to fit the bodice before adding the sleeve. But then they think there's too much ease in that bodice, because the amount of ease there is too much for a sleeveless block, and then they might overfit. Then when they put the sleeve on, it will be too fitting. So my recommendation is that you trace off and make the sleeveless block for fit, but you do have the option, if you prefer, of tracing off the moulage or tracing off the standard block. Of course, if you make any changes to the one that you've traced off, you will have to go back and make the relevant changes to the others. This is a comparison showing you my sleeveless block in comparison with Dee Dee's. This is to show you how different blocks can look. Dee Dee's block is on the left, mine is in the middle, and on the right, one is on top of the other to better compare them. Now, the reason Dee Dee's side seam dart looks so different to mine, or mine looks different to hers, is that she has an A cup or even less than an A cup, and that's pattern making cup I'm talking about, not a bra bust cup, and I have somewhere between a C cup and a D cup. This means I have a larger difference between my upper bust and my bust than Dee Dee does. Dee Dee's upper bust and bust are almost the same measurement. Now, as should be expected, the shape of the block shows you the shape of the person. Having said that, the front is only telling half the story. You need to look at the back together with the front to see the whole story. Here is another comparison, Dee Dee's toile and my toile, and our blocks with one on top of the other. It's good to get an understanding of how the block translates to 3D when put on the body. You can use either paper or cardboard to draft the block. You will be drafting the moulage, the sleeveless and the standard block all together. It's best therefore to keep the original and trace off what you want to use. After you've tested your block and you're sure it's finalised, you can then stick the paper down onto cardboard, as in put tape, sticky tape around the edges, then cut along the block outline. You will end up with a cardboard block, which is what you use to draft your patterns. It works anytime you want to create a cardboard copy of something you have drafted on paper. We will be drafting the half block shown to the left. This means if any measurements were taken across the full front, they have to be divided by 2. Now, if you have an asymmetric figure, you may eventually want to figure out how each side is different and work with a full front instead of the half front. On my website, I have a downloadable PDF with the list of measurements for the bodice block. A link can be found below in the YouTube video description section. If you happen to be watching this video on my website, then it's on the website page. Okay, so let's start drafting. Firstly, on your paper, draw a horizontal line across the bottom of your paper to indicate the waist. No measurement as yet, this is a reference line, and we'll start drafting from this point upwards. Actually, I want to point out that when drafting the bodice block, the centre front and the centre back are facing in different directions. So here, the centre back is on the left of the back block, whereas the centre front is on the right of the front block. That's because they are made for the same side of the body. So this is Dee Dee's right side back and right side front. That means that when you true the pieces, they will be up the correct way. You won't have to flip one over. So for Dee Dee, I'll be starting with the centre front on the right side and drafting to the left. So the first measurement, number 10 on the measurement chart, is the full length front. Using your full length front measurement, draw a vertical line from A on the waistline up to point B. Make sure the vertical line is at right angles to the horizontal waist guideline. Mark points A and B. The measurement, as shown on Dee Dee, is taken from the high neck point to the waist over the bust in a straight line. The upper bust arc front is measurement number 2 on the measurement chart. The upper bust arc front measurement is from side seam to side seam, and you need to divide the measurement in 2 for the half block. Using that measurement, measure across from B in a straight line, making sure that it's at right angles to the A to B line, and mark point C. Then finish the rectangle, drawing a line from C down to the waist and mark point D. Make sure all corners are right angles. Now, to be clear, this is just the body measurement, no ease. We will add the ease after we've drafted the block to the body measurements right at the end. Using your centre front measurement, that's measurement number 11 on the chart, measure up from point A on the A to B line and mark point E. Then draw a line from point E at right angles to the A to E line for about 10 centimetres and mark the end of that line, point E2. This is just a guideline, the E to E2, to help us draw the neck curve in later. As it's a guideline, it does not need to be an exact length. The across shoulder front is the next measurement. It's number 12 on the chart. I need to make a point here. For the rest of this video, you know I'm drafting the bodice front. So if I say across shoulder rather than across shoulder front, I assume that you know it's the front I'm talking about because I'm not drafting the back. I will try to remember to include the front, but please be aware, making sure on the measurement chart you are working in the front section. Your across shoulder front is generally measured from the centre front neck to the shoulder point. However, if you have a really rounded upper back with a forward jutting neck or very sloped shoulders and you take it this way, you'll end up with an incorrect across shoulder front measurement, and you'll need to take the measurement a bit further down. Now, using your across shoulder front measurement, measure across from point B towards point C and mark point F. Then draw another guideline, again because it's a guideline it does not need to be an exact length, about 8 to 10 centimetres down from point F at right angles to the B to F line and mark point F2. The shoulder slope front is measurement number 13 on the measurement chart. Using your shoulder slope front measurement, measure up diagonally from point A to touch the F to F2 guideline. Where it touches the guideline, mark point G. Now some instructions say to add 1/8 of an inch or so to your shoulder slope measurement for some ease. I just find that when you take those measurements a number of times, you can be out 1/8 of an inch each time you take it. My opinion is just take the body measurement and fine tune it in the toile. Now taking your bust depth measurement, that's measurement number 14 on the chart, measure down along the shoulder slope line from point G and mark point H. Then draw a line from point H to the centre front line and make that right angles to the centre front line. That is your bust level. Mark point H2 at the centre front. If you have taken the bust depth measurement a number of ways, that is number 15 and number 16 on the measurement chart, you can now see if they match up to what you have drafted. So first measure from point E to point H2. This should be the same as measurement number 15 on the chart. Then measure from the B to C line and at right angles to it down to point H. This should match measurement number 16 on the chart. If those measurements don't match up, then you've taken some measurements incorrectly and you might want to check it before continuing. The bust span is measurement number 17 on the measurement chart. It's usually taken from bust point to bust point and divided by 2. So measure from H2 on the H2 to H line and mark point H3. Now for some people, H3 will end up being to the left of point H. For Dee Dee, H3 has ended up exactly on top of point H. Basically, her bust point is exactly on her shoulder slope line. That won't be the case for everyone. But wherever H3 has ended up, whether it's on top of H or to the left of H, rename H3 as the bust point and erase H. So you should end up with point H2 at the centre front and a bust point. And I'll show you what I mean on the next slide, just to be clear. So before we look at the shoulder length, let's look at that bust point. So what I have is just H2 at the centre front line, and then I've got bust point. Now for some people, that bust point will be to the left of the shoulder slope line, and it could be quite a bit to the left of that shoulder slope line, but the H and H3 have been erased. So moving on to the shoulder length, which is measurement number 8 on the chart. Using the shoulder length measurement, measure from point G to touch the C to B line and mark point I. I am using a lowercase I as the uppercase looks like a 1. Okay, from I and at right angles to the G to I shoulder length, draw a guideline down past the E to E2 line and mark the end of that guideline I2. It just has to be somewhere past the E to E2 line. The armhole depth is measurement number 19 on the measurement chart. Using the armhole depth measurement, measure down from point C on the C to D line and mark point J. From point J, draw a straight line to the centre front, making sure it is at right angles to the centre front line. This is the upper bust line. Now you don't usually mark the upper bust line on the block, but I want you to mark it to make sure you remember to draw it on your toile. It is good to see that line on your toile so you are clear where the upper bust is, not just at your armhole depth, but at the front and at the back. And I have included a photo of my toile so you can see that for some people it wouldn't be quite so obvious where their upper bust is without this drawn on the toile to show you. Measurements number 20 and 21 are checking measurements to confirm your front armhole depth. Measure from point E to the upper bust line and see if it matches measurement number 20. Measure from point G to the upper bust line and see if it matches measurement number 21. If they don't match, firstly check your measurements. If you can't get them to match, choose one and keep drafting. You'll draw the lines on the toile and check them again at that stage. This is an aside. If you find, notice, come across a mistake in my videos, and I mean a mistake that matters regarding drafting the block, not a spelling mistake, please first check the video description in the YouTube underneath this video to see if I have noted that mistake and if I have put a link to the correct information. If there is nothing in the YouTube description box, then it hasn't been brought to my attention and I haven't noticed it. And in that case, please let me know of the mistake via a comment. But always, first, please check the YouTube description box. I can't actually amend a video, and if I replace it, I lose all the comments, likes, and views. So if it's a small mistake, I will leave the video as it is with a link to the corrections in the video description. If it's a really big mistake, I'll probably replace it. Okay, so now using the bust depth at the side seam measurement, that's number 17 on the measurement chart, measure down from point J towards point D and mark point K. We'll now mark the rest of the bust line because from H2 to the bust point is part of our bust line, but we'll mark the rest of it, and in that process we'll get the angle for our side seam that will determine our bust cup. So first take your bust arc front measurement, that is from side seam to side seam, and divide it by 2, and that's measurement number 5 on the chart. Then measure from H2 to the bust point and subtract it from that measurement. Take the remaining amount and measure from the bust point towards and through point K and mark point K2. Now I will repeat this using Dee Dee's measurements in the next slide so you're clear on what we're doing. Dee Dee's front bust arc is 49.5 centimetres. Divide that by 2 for the half block, we get 24 3/4 centimetres. From H2 to the bust point, which is part of the bust line, is 9.5 centimetres. Therefore, 24 3/4 minus 9.5 centimetres is 15.25 centimetres, and that's the remainder we need from the bust point out. So I'll measure from the bust point towards and through point K for 15.25 centimetres and mark point K2. While it does look very angular on the block, I have just placed those exact lines on Dee Dee's toile, and on the toile it doesn't look angular. The bust is actually a curve, but those straight lines are good enough for fitting purposes. Now if you have a large bust, chances are that that line will look even more angular. There's a straight line from the centre front to the bust point, but then it goes way up on an angle. On my body form, it actually looks straight and parallel to the floor. On my body, it's actually angled up a bit, but that's because I've put on weight, and the block that fits my body form doesn't fit me so well at the moment. So the next measurement is the side length, number 9 on the measurement chart. We'll draw the side seam, and in the process we'll get the side seam angle that will give us our bust cup. So taking your side seam length measurement, measure from point J through point K2 in a straight line, and at the end of that measurement mark point L. Moving up to the across chest measurement, which is number 22 on the chart. You usually measure from armhole to armhole and divide by 2. Now when you measured the across chest, you should have noted the depth where you took that measurement, how far down from the centre front you took that measurement. Usually that's around about halfway between the centre front neck and the upper bust. I took it a little bit lower than that for Dee Dee. Now using the across chest measurement, measure inwards from the centre front line and at right angles to the centre front line and mark point M. We will draw the armhole next, but first we'll just draw a guideline to assist in that. We don't want to dip below this line when drawing the curve. So from J, draw a guideline for about 8 centimetres, and that line has to be at right angles to the side seam. Mark the end point J2. Taking a French curve, draw the armhole from the shoulder point G to touch the across chest point M and finishing at point J at the underarm upper bust. Now this block currently has no ease, so that armhole curve is for the moulage. So now the neckline curve. Taking the French curve again, draw a line from point I at the high neck and down to point E at the centre front. Now don't dip below the E to E2 line. However, you can cut into the I to I2 line. Now with Dee Dee, her neck curve, the pink line, does not cut into that I to I2 line, but the green line shows how standard shaping works for the neckline. Now I will show you in the next slide on my block, because in this regard I am standard and Dee Dee is not. So I have enlarged my block and you can just see the top of it, and this is my neckline curve. For my curve, it goes in 1/4 centimetre beyond the eye to eye2 line, and this is actually what a lot of block making instructions say for the standard body. So it seems that I am standard in this regard, the shape of my neck, whereas DD isn't standard. Now we'll do the waist. First we'll place the first dart leg. Measure from point H2 to the bust point. Take that measurement and subtract 2 centimetres. Using the total, measure on the waistline from point A towards point D and mark point N. Now draw a line from the bust point through point N and 1/4 centimetre past point N. Mark point N2. The reason for extending the dart leg below the waist is to get a curve for the waist rather than a straight line, and you'll see how that works at the end when we do the waist shaping. Now draw a guideline from point L at the side seam to point N2, the first dart leg. This is our waistline, or part of our waistline, because A to N2 is also part of the waistline, but we need to determine how much of this L to N2 is excess to requirements and put the excess into the dart. So take your waist measurement and divide it by 4. We'll call this value X. Now measure from point A to point N2 and we'll call that value Y. Take X and subtract Y, giving us the value of Z, or Z if you're American. Using the value of Z, measure from point L at the side seam along that guideline that you've just drawn and mark point O. Now measure the first dart leg from the bust point to N2. We need to make our second dart leg the same length. So draw the second dart leg from the bust point through point O and mark point O2. Now draw a line from point L to point O2. At the moment we're drawing a straight line, but we will later make that a bit curved. We'll do that at the end after we've converted it to a 2-dart block. Now the main shape of the block is finished. That's without any ease, and we actually haven't drawn in the waistline properly. We'll finish the waistline curve later when we make it a 2-dart block. So we want to add 2.5 centimetres ease in the waist across the whole block, which is a bit hard to divide evenly. We'll add 1 centimetre ease to the front and 1.5 to the back. For the half front, that's 0.5 centimetre. So measure out 0.5 centimetre from point L as a continuation of the O2 to L line and mark point L2. This is the waist side seam point for the sleeveless and the standard block. Now we'll add ease at the upper bust for a sleeveless block. The upper bust ease for the sleeveless block is 7.5 centimetres across the whole block. We'll add 2/3 of the ease to the back and 1/3 to the front. We tend to need more ease in the back. We stretch forward and curve our back more than we move our arms backwards. Measure out from point J as a continuation of the upper bust line for 1.25 centimetres and mark point J2. Using your side seam measurement again, measure from point J2 through point L2 and mark point L3. Point 3 will be very close to point L2. The shaded orange section shows you the amount of ease that has been added for the sleeveless block. Note that it's a wedge wider at the top and gets narrow down at the waist. So there's less ease at the bust than there is in the upper bust. Of course, this is the half block, so there is an equivalent amount on the other side of the front, plus the ease that's in the back. Now finishing the armhole curve should be quite straightforward for the sleeveless block, and you won't have to make much of a change. The first centimetre or 2 of the armhole can generally be a straight line. It makes it easier to true up with the back armhole. Now we'll draw in the side seam for the standard block to be used with sleeves. So we'll add some ease and also lower the armhole a little. Ease for the standard block is usually 12.5 centimetres in the upper bust. If you are wondering about this amount of ease and think it may be too much, I suggest you watch my video on ease. It's part of the Bodice Block Essentials, where I show that this is the standard amount at the upper bust for the standard block. Just note though that we are adding this at the upper bust. There will be less ease in the bust. If you have a look, you can see the wedge of ease in the sleeveless block narrows as it moves toward the waist. There is less ease in the bust than there is in the upper bust. So 12.5 centimetres ease, but as we're using the sleeveless block as our starting point, and we've already added 7.5 centimetres there, we need 5 centimetres more. A third of that to the front, 2/3 to the back. This works out at 1.66 centimetres for the front. Halve that and round it down slightly, and we end up with 3/4 of a centimetre ease extra for the front. So first we'll lower the armhole 1 centimetre vertically down from J2, then move out at right angles for 3/4 of a centimetre and mark point J3. Draw a line from J3 to the waist point L3. That's the side seam line for the block for sleeves, or the standard block. We will have to draw a different armhole for the standard sleeved block. We will end up with 2 block outlines plus the original moulage. This shouldn't be too confusing because 90% of the block is the same. You'll have 3 different side seams for the 3 different blocks and 2 different armholes. But you should be able to quite clearly see them there and be able to trace off the one that you want to use. Now we can measure how much ease we have ended up with at the bust level for the front here, and when we draft the back we can check the back amount and add it together. You should end up with about 5 to 7.5 centimetres ease in the bust for the sleeveless block, and between 7.5 and 9 centimetres for the standard block to be used with sleeves. That's the total across the whole block. If when you make your toile this is too much, then shave a little bit off the wedge, front and back, for both either the sleeveless and the sleeved block, if that's what you want to do. If you do that, make sure you taper it down to point L3 at the waist. Now I've just noticed as I'm assembling the slides and the audio on the day that I want to put this up that the armhole shape of the sleeveless block is a bit different, and I haven't explained that. The shoulder length is shorter. I've just realised that I cut out a few slides in between here, and in so doing I missed a piece of information. The sleeveless block usually has a shorter shoulder length, and I've taken 1 centimetre off the shoulder edge. I really don't have the time to go back and put in those slides, or this video won't get up till next weekend because I just don't have any more time over the next few days. So just note that the sleeveless block does usually have some taken off the shoulder length at the shoulder edge, and I have already done that. This is a note here, an aside. I have a feeling that I have made Dee Dee's armhole too low. It's hard to tell since she's not human. What I mean is the back of the arm is sometimes lower than the front, but Dee Dee's arm is a perfect oval. Anyway, I think that the depth I drafted for her sleeveless should have been for her standard block, which would mean I need to raise the sleeveless a little. This means her armhole depth should have been higher, and in that case I would need to increase her side seam length. Just another point, I made Dee Dee's toile from the 1 dart block. I only did that because she has a small bust. I wouldn't do that for myself, so I would recommend if you make a toile from the 1 dart block, you only do so if you've got a small bust. In the following slides I'll be going through how to change this 1 dart block into a 2 dart block. The way we're going to convert this into a 2 dart block is by cutting and spreading. First, draw a guideline below the waistline and parallel to it, that is 0.5 centimetre below the waistline. You can see that on the leftmost image. Still looking at the image on the left, from the side seam, cut along the bust line to the bust point. Then cut up through the left waist dart leg to the bust point, but leave a hinge. Don't separate that piece completely. In the second image, I've coloured that cut piece in yellow, so it's easier to see what's going on. That piece is pivoted down, pivoted on the hinge left at the bust point so that the side seam touches the line below the waist. Now on the right, I'm showing you that you need to put paper underneath the opened up section and stick it down. So that opened up section is the side seam dart, and the waist dart has reduced in size, and the blue lines show what the waist dart is now. On the left is what we ended up with on the last side, except that I have joined up the side seams through the dart for the sleeve block, the sleeveless and the moulage, and on the right hand side I have outlined those in different colours. So the block for sleeves, the standard block, is outlined in orange, The sleeveless block is outlined in blue, and the moulage side seam line is the black line. Now what's left to do with the block is to finish off the shaping of the side seam dart, finish off the waist shaping, and put in the dart points, because currently the darts go all the way to the bust point. Now in order to be able to focus on the important things that we need to do, I'm going to take out one of these blocks, which is the sleeveless block. I'll trace it off and I'll use it by itself in the next few slides so there are no distractions. But what I'm going to cover can be applied to any of those 3 blocks. So to finish off the shaping of the side seam dart, as shown in the A example, locate the middle of the side seam dart, measure it and determine where the middle is, and draw a guideline from the bust point through that point. Then, as shown in the B example, the middle one, continue the side seam line from the armhole, so past the top dart leg to touch that mid dart guideline. Then, as shown in C, draw a line from the bottom dart leg, the side seam dart leg, to meet that previous point. In this case, for DD, that's only a very small amount, but that will mean that the dart will close flush against the side seam. Now on the left is the last image from the last slide. In the middle is the final shape of the block, including those lines from C. Now on the right is my block to show you how different it will look with a bigger bust and a bigger side seam dart. But the shaping was done the same. The side seam line is continued from the armhole in a straight line to the mid dart. Then a line is drawn up from the bottom dart leg to meet that previous point. The shaping done this way means that the dart will close downwards towards the waist, not up towards the armhole. Generally, you don't want darts to close upwards towards the armhole because that creates a little pocket there, so for when you do the washing, you can catch fluff in there, etc. I suppose you could catch it downwards too, but that would fall out. But anyway, side seam darts tend to fold down towards the waist. Now for the waist shaping. As shown in image 1, find the mid dart point again, the waist dart, the middle of it, and draw a line from the bust point through the mid dart point. Remember that we dropped the dart legs for 3/16 of an inch, and we also dropped the side seam point earlier as well. So we want a gentle curve for the waist using a French curve. Look at figure 2 and make the first part of the waistline from the center front completely straight for a little bit. We want that to be at a right angle. We don't want a dip or a valley at the center front at the waistline. But curve it down to the dart leg point and continue that curve till it touches the mid dart line. Then flip the French curve over so you've got a reflected curve and curve that line back up again. You also want there to be a right angle at the side seam so that it will true better with the back block. That's shown by that blue square, showing that that side seam point there is squared. On the left is an example of how the waistline would look after the dart was closed if we didn't do that curving. And the image on the right shows you why we do that curving. In this slide, I'm showing you that the curve I drew gives a nice flow through at the side seam from the back block to the front. The last thing to do is pull the dart points back a little bit from the bust point. The bigger the bust, the bigger the size, the further away generally the dart point is from the bust point. A general guide or a starting point is given here on the screen. You'll probably need to pause and have a look. I'm not going to read all of those out. Now these are only general guides and only go up to a D cup. Maybe you could look at your clothes and measure how far away your dart points are from your apex. That is assuming that the dart points on your clothes suit your body. Measure along the mid dart line away from the bust point and place the new dart point on the mid dart line and redraw your darts. I recommend you draw all the lines from the block on the toile. Doing this means you can see where you've made mistakes, and also it's much easier to see where the adjustments need to be made. From here on is some general information on truing the front and the back and finishing off your block. You need to do this after drafting both the front and the back. As I said at the beginning, you can draft either the front or the back first in this new system, and so I'm putting this information at the end of both videos. I'm not using the block I drafted for Dee Dee in these following slides. I'm repurposing the slides from my original video to save some time. When we finish both the front and the back, we need to check that the lengths of adjacent pieces match, and also check that there is a nice flow through in the curves. If you need to increase the length of anything, you may need to stick on little bits of paper. I'm not going to be doing that in my example, but just be aware you may have to. So firstly, we'll do the side seam. Put the back and front blocks together at the side seam waist. Check that there's a smooth curve at the waist. Then check the side seam length. Firstly from the waist up to the dart leg. Then check that the remainder matches up. Check that there is a smooth curve through the armhole. Then match the front and back at the high neck point to check the neckline curve. While you're there, mark the shoulder dart placement from the back block onto the front block so that you can check the shoulder length. Move the front block to the other dart leg and check the shoulder lengths are the same. This is especially important when drafting the three options together, the moulage and the sleeveless and the sleeved. You may have traced off the sleeveless block on the front and then accidentally trace off the sleeved version in the back. So definitely always check your shoulder lengths match. Then check the flow through curve of the armhole. When you have your final front and back blocks, don't forget to mark and notch the dart legs, label the block, put all the relevant information on it, maybe including the date you drafted it. Note whether it's a sleeveless block or the sleeved block or the moulage. Now I did hear a pattern maker say that you don't put the grain line on the block, you put that on the pattern, but I like to have it on my block to remind me to put it on the pattern. Sometimes I forget, and then I get to putting my pattern pieces on the fabric and realize I haven't drawn the grain line on there. So yes, I definitely prefer to put the grain line on the block as a reminder. So here are some final blocks, not Dee Dee's, but this is what the final blocks look like. These ones don't have the bust line or upper bust marked. That was needed during the drafting process for making the toile and getting the measurements right. On the actual blocks, you don't need them. Next, I'm working on my EPUB booklets for the pants and bodice block, so I won't be publishing a video for a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks. My first video back will be a pattern. If you find my content useful, please A, buy me a cup of coffee on Ko-fi, B, buy my booklets, C, share my content, D, all of the above, so that I can eventually work on this full time and create more and more content. This is Maria from Dress Pattern Making. Ciao!
Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Sounds of the rude world heard in the day, loved by the moonlight have all passed away.